have sort of a, yeah, I mean, what I'm curious about is what other clean tech incubators are there in Canada? And you know, this seems to me like a really a massive growth space within our country. I'm just wondering if you could give me some context.
Yeah, there are specialized ones that tend to be fairly regional. The closest would be Sarnia for petrochemical. But they tend to be regional and fairly focused. You know, Alberta, a fair amount on things like oil sands and a research consortium put together out there. I think this is taking a pretty broad view as well of what clean technologies are, everything that includes the specialization that we see at the university in terms of clean water, energy production, energy storage and distribution, intelligent building technologies, really leveraging the strength of Waterloo. I think what's great about all of the different incubators and accelerators around the country is they provide programming, but they build on the strengths of the local region. And so here we're going to build on the strengths of the research and the interest and the activity, because to grow these companies and create jobs, you need to be able to fuel the companies with talent. And we certainly have that talent within the region, being generated within the region, and to be able to provide jobs locally, that's pretty exceptional. So we won't lose those people coming.
Mm-hmm. The largest faculty of environment in Canada is at the University of Waterloo.
Further questions from council? Maybe perhaps somebody wants to move it. Councillor Durrell, maybe? Councillor Freeman? I would just say I think this is an exceptional opportunity. What I think I'm concerned about is our target of 80% of greenhouse gas reductions by 2050, and seeing that people are buying more cars. I think we saw it was up 2% in the past few years locally, and we need people to change their ways. We can build the facilities, we can put up the buildings, we can build more trails, but we need to be able to convince people to move. So I think it's one of our best hopes for this council to make an investment in all those potential learnings there, because we have to come up with that both at the city, the region, and provincially and Canada-wide. So I think this is a great investment. Councillor Freeman, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I'm excited about the work that I anticipate is going to come out of this investment. But I think Angela made a really important point in that more broadly, the citizenry who is underwriting this doesn't necessarily feel as though they have access to better understanding what's happening. And so I think as a part of this, and I'm not asking for this to be another motion, but I think that we would like more than just an annual report that we get right now and other things, because I do think that clean technology, that Canada is very well positioned to advance green technology as a huge future for the country. And as we unpack that and unpack this investment, I think that citizens should hear about it, and I think those should happen on a television night, whether it's once a year or whatever. But I think that this is a story that needs to be told more broadly. People get a sense of what's happening in terms of the high tech and the entrepreneurial relationship because they see those companies spinning out. But this is new, and I think we need to really talk about it.
Thank you. I think it's a good ad. I think there'll be lots of potential for outreach from this new site. With that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Well, that's all of us. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And look forward to the coffee at the grand opening.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We can get back. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Please. Mm-hmm. Next up, we have the Uptown Community Improvement Plan, Commercial Building Improvement Loans, Spring 2018, report prepared by Sandy Little. It's for questions. People have questions at this time. Councillor Durrell?
More a comment. I appreciate the work that's going into the CIP, and it's very helpful to see the building and the development that goes along with it. One of the concerns I had, and I don't know how we go about this, and I don't know if this is the CIP that would be a part of it, but one of the number 5 is 101 King Street North, and they're saying it's a restaurant, and in fact, it's not a restaurant; it's a late night bar, and I know for a fact that the neighborhood is quite concerned about it, and so there's a lot of issues with it. And now we're going to give them tax dollars, and so I just thought obviously our process. There's a lot of checks and balances along the way, and there's nothing illegal about it. But I just wanted to flag it to the rest of council that perhaps maybe there's something around. We want all buildings to look nice and add to the vibrancy of uptown. And frankly, this one is going to be open from 10 p.m. till 2 a.m. 2 nights a week, and that doesn't add to any of the things the reason why we did the community improvement plan. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Is that something staff wanted to comment on or just take away? I'm just wondering about how that would fit into either maybe adjusting the CIP or such.
Sure. Through you, Mayor, to Councillor Durrell. At the time that the report was prepared, we had not met as a committee in terms of reviewing all of the available information, particularly as part of that application. That particular application will require additional planning approvals, so we're certainly working with the applicant right now through that planning process. So the approval of this particular CBIL, Commercial Building Improvement Loan, as well as any of the others, are dependent on municipal approvals. So I don't know if that maybe helps some of the questions. I do realize that the application did state that it was a restaurant, and additional information has now been provided as part of that particular application. The CIP is not based on use. It is based on the fact that it's a commercial endeavor, so we don't restrict as part of the CIP. However, it will be subject to additional planning approvals through that process. So they will not receive CIP approval until they've received their other municipal approvals as part of the overall process.
And I mean, I should add that building definitely needs an upgrade. So I'm for that, but just wanted to point out that. Yeah.
Thank you. Further questions for staff? Seeing none, perhaps somebody wants to move it. Councillor Durrell, Councillor Veith. All those in favour? All of us, thank you. Next up, Silver Lake and Laurel Creek Environmental Assessment report prepared by Jessica Kellerman, and she is ready to present.
Is this working? Here we go. Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski, members of Council, staff, and community members. I'm here today with our consultant, Stantec, to present the results of the class environmental assessment for the Silver Lake and Laurel Creek rehabilitation in Waterloo Park. I'd like to introduce Steve Brown from Stantec, who will be giving a short presentation on to summarize the EA.
Thanks, Jessica. Mr. Mayor and Councillors, pleased to be here to present an overview of this study on behalf of both Stantec and CH2M, who combined for the project. So, I'll try to go through this relatively quickly. Most of the information you're going to see is part of your package. And I know I've spoken to many of you at public meetings and so on, so I'll try to go through things and we can get to questions if there are any. So, Waterloo Park and Silver Lake are wonderful amenities. I don't think anybody can question that. To have a green space this size right in the middle of the city is something pretty special, and I think it has potential to remain special for a long time to come. And the park itself is almost 50 hectares, and the lake is 2 hectares of that as well. You've got Laurel Creek flowing through. You've got all kinds of recreational and passive aesthetic features associated with the park, as well as the historic components as well. So it's a wonderful opportunity to have to work on. The lake itself is actually got significant history with the city of Waterloo as well, from its origins back in the early 1800s as a grist mill to the point where the farm was purchased by then the town of Waterloo to provide recreational and aesthetic amenity for the growing community. And it remains that way today. Still very important and very valued and very loved based on everything I heard at all the public meetings and my own personal perspective as well, since I'm also a resident of the city. But there have been some environmental challenges, and they've remained. And I think I skipped a slide. There we go. Sedimentation being the primary one. You can see from this 2017 slide the sediment at the inlet to the lake there, and that doesn't even tell the full story because most of the south shore of the lake is actually quite shallow. The current estimate is about 30,000 cubic meters of sediment in there that has accumulated over the last 20 years or so. So what we were charged with doing was to try to determine a rehabilitation plan for Silver Lake and Laurel Creek within Waterloo Park. Would go through documentation of past conditions, looking at current conditions in the lake and in the park, identifying and evaluating solutions, and then selecting a preferred that would go forward to final design and ultimately construction. And just as a note, we aren't at the detailed design stage. This is still the Class CA. We're selecting options at this stage, and we'll get into the detailed design a little bit later on. The project has followed a Class EA. It's been the subject of a previous Class EA as well, and this has been considered an addendum. And you can see that the outline here, the Class EA task, is very similar to a couple of slides ago, looking at problem definition, inventory, existing conditions, and developing and assessing alternatives. Our work started about a year ago, on behalf of the consultants anyway. We went through a number of desktop and field studies from archaeology to cultural heritage, hydrogeology, groundwater system, our natural heritage, and our surface water resources to try to fill in any gaps from the existing previous studies and to make sure we were right up to date on what's going on now with the water systems, particularly through the lake and the creek. And what that took us to, based on that information, we developed a series of alternatives in consultation, obviously, with city staff and through the consultation process of the EA study. Looked at 5 different options for the lake and 3 for the creek itself. So for Silver Lake, our options included do nothing, which is our baseline, our comparable. An option to remove the sediment but leave the lake as it stands today, otherwise. 3 is to remove sediment and then reconfigure the lake to try to manage that incoming sediment load better in the future. 4 was to create a new Laurel Creek channel that would go around Silver Lake. And the 5th, was the most radical, was to remove the lake altogether. For Laurel Creek, our options included, again, the do nothing. We identified in the field a number of locations that needed some repairs and some work, so we could just address those individually, or we could do a full reconstruction of the creek within the park. Those were all our options that we had a look at through the study. So in terms of evaluating all those, each alternative then was evaluated based on a series of 4 categories: natural environment, technical, social, and economic. And within each of those basic categories were a number of individual criteria. And that's the list you see on the left there. And you're not intended to read it. I think it's a little blurry intentionally. But just to give you an idea of how many we looked at. So for each alternative, there are 18 separate criteria there that we had to evaluate. And we started with the assumption that each of those 4 categories would be equally important. Once we had done all our scoring, we actually went back and did a sensitivity analysis on that to see if you changed the importance of each of the categories, if something was more important than something else, would the result change? And we were quite happy to see that it didn't. We were very consistent. No matter which category you weighted the heaviest, the result came out the same, which made us feel pretty good that we had a fairly robust solution here that covered a wide range of criteria. So in terms of our preferred solution, it was alternative 3, remove the sediment from the lake and reconfigure the lake. And for Laurel Creek, it was to address those individual locations and repair those instead of a wholesale reconstruction. This graphic just tries to summarize some of those things, and I'll go through some of them. I realize this is a pretty high-level thing, and all these are going to get addressed and refined further through the detailed design process. But the yellow highlights there on the left-hand side of the slide, the west side of the park, are basically the stream repair locations, and each of them are identified in terms of the specific work anticipated. And the lake itself, we would look at a number of things. As long as you've got a lake, you're going to have sediment coming into it, so we're going to have to manage that. One of the things we looked at is a possible sediment forebay. Whether that's up or downstream the LRT tracks is yet to be determined specifically, but that would allow a centralized location to capture that and facilitate cleanouts, because they're going to have to be cleanouts for this. We would also look at other things like stabilizing the shoreline and minimizing sediment delivery coming to the lake. We look at redoing the lake bathymetry, making it deeper again, promoting natural or native species rather, both terrestrial and aquatic. Looking at maintaining trails and accesses and view sheds and the cultural heritage and so on of the lake as well. Also going to be important as we go through the detailed design. I'm going to throw a few pictures in just to give examples of the photos of Victoria Park Lake in Kitchener, which is a similar situation. I wanted to share particularly the shoreline treatments here, just as one option. You can see the left and the lower slide show the armor stone edges, which are most of the way around Victoria Park Lake. And the photo on the top is some enhanced recreational opportunities the City of Kitchener is pursuing that are potentials for Silver Lake as well. This is actually the forebay in Victoria Park Lake, and it shows a different shoreline treatment. The top photo is just after construction, and the bottom one is a few years later. So again, just a different treatment. It gets away from the armor stone. So there's different options that the city has going forward for how they want to proceed, what it specifically is going to look like. Obviously, public consultation was a very significant part of this. There's a lot of interest in it. At our PICs, there were a lot of people came out to visit us. Each one was very well attended. We worked with staff to keep information up on the city website to make sure it was current and get the word out. The notices and so on were widely distributed both by mail, by email, on the website, signs, and so on. So as I show there were three public information centers dating back to about a year ago, actually, almost exactly a year ago was the first one, through December and then again in March. And the regulatory agencies were also contacted and involved, particularly the GRCA, through our initial EA process here. So where do we go next? Next steps to our the next thing to do is to finalize the Class EA. That will involve, subject to council endorsement, obviously, putting that on a 30-day review period. We are also going to be involved in the submission of an environmental impact statement that will get done through the summer and fall. And then the detailed design process will start, and that's going to be a separate process from the EA part of the work, but that'll get initiated later this year and going into the permitting and tendering really through 2019 and hopefully construction the winter of 2019-2020. So that is our quick overview, and I can answer questions if there are any.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have Councillor Durrell and Councillor Veith. Councillor Whaley.
Well, this is a big deal for Waterloo, and I sit on the Waterloo Park Committee, and I know that we've been dreaming about this, and once it got into the budget, we're all pretty excited about it. So I just have a couple of quick questions. First off is, just to make sure that we're protected and the detailed design. If you could go back to the slide where you talked about, I think I wrote steam repair.
Stream repair?
What was it called? Stream repair? So,
is that the slide?
Yeah, and so I guess what I'm wondering is, we kind of got caught in a corner when LRT came through and they said, yeah, no worries, there won't be fences. We don't need fences. And now there's fences, and they're the ugliest fences I've ever seen in my life. And so I think what I'm concerned about is we're working so hard and we're investing a lot of money into Waterloo Park. And what I'm worried about is we're going to have some big, ugly, cleaner thing that has to go through the stream so that the sediment gets pulled out, or I don't know what that looks like. So I just want to, I suppose that'd be detailed design, but I just wanted to confirm that it won't be ugly.
Well, we can't say exactly what it's going to look like, but I can use the example from Victoria Park Lake. And I'm going to go forward a slide or two here.
Yeah, if we could get Victoria Lake, I'd be really happy with that.
So that's the forebay, actually. That's what it looks like at Victoria Park Lake. You're actually looking at where it comes in Victoria Park. It actually comes underneath another railway track as well.
Yeah.
And comes into the park right there. There's a little bit more to it off the left of the slide that you can't see in the photo. But the intent is to provide a place where the sediment will settle out and be contained so it doesn't get throughout the lake, so that when you do have to do a clean out, you are cleaning out the forebay and not having to disrupt the entire lake and the entire park. And some of the design elements that would be part of the forebay would be that location, that area, to try to maximize the time between cleanouts, but also to facilitate that in terms of construction access. Right now, it's actually pretty difficult to get to Silver Lake as far as construction access goes. So by positioning a forebay near access routes, that's one of the ways to facilitate that. Another piece that we've got with Victoria Park Lake is a bypass structure, so that you can actually manage the water as you're doing the clean out. You can't do it, well, you could do it in the wet, but it's likely going to be more expensive, so you want to be able to do it in the dry, and it leaves that type of opportunity available. So you can see, I don't think it looks horrible in terms of what it looks like, and I would see a similar sort of treatment here.
So you hide it with natural features, is sort of what you're saying?
Yeah. You're not going to be able to hide it entirely. It's given the location, it's going to be visible. But
okay, then can you go back to, because it looks like there's a whole bunch of yellow dots that you've put around the creek that comes in. Mm-hmm. What would those look like?
Those are individual locations where we observe some erosion or other problems. For example, if I can, it's hard to see.
So those are more, you're just going to repair it. It won't be a place where we're actually pulling out sediment.
So the only place. To the lake, the closest one to the LRT, the middle tracks that go through the middle there.
That's where the biggie is.
There's an old concrete weir there.
Okay.
It doesn't do anything anymore.
Okay.
And it could be removed and the channel restored around it. So it would be a local repair to that area. But it wouldn't be broad to take up the entire reach of the creek or anything.
And this picture is not the current one, because there's a road that goes down there. Is that right?
There's a boardwalk that goes along the side there, yes.
Yeah.
That's correct. This photo, I think, is 2017 or 16, perhaps.
Right. The plan is to have a road down there.
Yeah, you can actually see the parking lot that's not there anymore.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so then my other question is, I'm sure staff won't be surprised by this, but why so long? So can you go to your alternative? Did you know I was going to ask that question? Probably. And it's not the same as in our package either, so maybe, but if we pretty much know what we're going to do, right? We know after we pass that today. So then we just go to detailed design, just go to detailed design. So why couldn't, because I imagine that we have to do it over the winter, correct?
We don't have to.
Oh, okay. But it's better if we do because it's easier?
If you're doing like traditional mechanical dredging where you're bringing equipment in, it's a lot easier to manage the material and lessen the mess you're making if you're doing it in the winter, because that sediment will be that much more solid than it is when it's warm outside.
So I guess my question is, we're 6 months to winter. Why can't we get the detailed design done and do it 2018, 2019 construction? So
in
it's
terms
ready
of,
for next summer.
So through you, Councillor Mayor Jaworski, in terms of finalizing the EA, so we have to get that posted for 30 days. And in the interim period, we get the RFP ready for detailed design. Okay. That will go out, and then we will award to whatever consulting firm gets the detailed design component and oversight and admin for construction. Okay. And then they go through the detailed design of the preferred alternative. Once we got far enough along in that process, then we start our permitting. That's where your time constraints come in. So we have to go to Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change. We have to go through a Department of Fisheries and Oceans approval, very likely Ministry of Natural Resources and Fisheries. Wow. We have to get a GRCA approval, and all of the timelines for those types of approvals, we're looking at sometimes minimum 8 months. It could be as long as a year.
because of third party.
And I know that we touched on this with the Pond 53 work, but say we do get approval to do beneficial reuse, that's another permit through MOECC. And because it's more of a new process for them, that could take, again, a very long time to go through. So we have to give ourselves enough time for that. And then you have to put the tender together and get that out and select your contractor. So it does seem long, but every minute is used for something to get us to the point where we go to construction.
Next up, Councillor Veith, then Councillor Whaley.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, could you please go back to that slide with the chart on it? You said it was blurry, but I just wondered how, there, right there. So I caught goose management.
Yep.
And so why, can you just, it's terrible in there.
I didn't make it blurry enough.
No, you didn't. No. But that's really important. Like it's just awful to walk or ride through that park because of the mismanagement or something of geese. But can you just explain the numbers? Because in alternative 1, there's no geese management, and alternative 2, there's no geese management, but there is for the other.
I can.
How does that?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So under alternative 1, it's do nothing. So it's basically do what we're doing now, which is nothing, right, for goose management. I mean, there's a few things we did try to do through the baseline assessment, but they've been ineffective. It's very difficult to manage geese. So the reason it's 0 is because there's really no management of geese currently. Under alternative 2, all we're doing is removing the sediment from Silver Lake. So it's essentially like cleaning it, but it's still status quo. We're doing the same things. Under alternative 3, we're actually going to start looking at how can we reconfigure the lake edge and do some vegetation treatment around the edge to discourage geese, and what other things can we implement, maybe some policies around goose management in the park. And so that's why. And then again, with alternative 5, it's rated as a 10 because we'd be removing the lake, which would remove the open water feature, which they like to land in, and it would be returned to a creek. So you're not going to see as many geese. So that's sort of the justification behind why the scores are like that.
Councillor Whaley.
Well, when I'm looking at your preferred alternative, the words jump out at me, reconfiguring the footprint of the lake. And I hearken back to those dark days of not too many years ago when we were going to rehabilitate Clare Creek and that pond on Clare Creek Lake, and the public outrage, the idea that we were going to reconfigure that little pond, created such a hullabaloo that went on for, it seemed like, for years. And I recall it actually drawn out the proceedings for a couple of years. It delayed it for that much. So I'm just suggesting to you, when your plan includes doing any reconfiguration of that lake, I can tell you that that beloved little pond at Clare Creek will have half the drama of any change that you might consider to this lake that's been around. I swam in it as a boy back in the 1860s. I plan to swim in it again, but I'm suggesting if there's any reconfiguration happening, that there is a huge community consultation process so we don't go through what we went through before, because it was a real brutal time for this council.
So through you, Mayor Jaworski, I don't know if that was a question, but I'm going to answer it. I was involved somewhat with the Clear Lake project, and I'm very aware of how much controversy there was involved with that whole process. And we have kept that in mind through this process. We've done a ton of consultation to date. There's public consultation planned for the detailed design phase of the work, and we will continue to talk with people. This alternative has been by far and large the most popular alternative across the board. We haven't had really any big pushback on this alternative. And when we say reconfigure, it's really, I mean, if you look at the space right now, we're kind of constrained on either side. There's not a lot of space that you could take this and move it anywhere. So it really is sort of the same footprint. When we say reconfigure, if you're adding a 4-bay in above the LRT line, that's going to somewhat reconfigure the lake because you're adding in a new feature. That's still going to look like a mini lake, but it's going to be in a different location than what people are used to seeing right now. Same with working with the Parks Master Plan and working with the Parks group on what are the edges going to look like, and how can we sort of combine priorities through this project and through the Parks Master Plan to see how that edge is going to look and where is the edge actually going to end up at the end of the day. So there's not a lot of room to move it dramatically, is what I'm trying to say.
Next up, Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I obviously looked at this through the lens of Clare Lake because I didn't just live that project. It almost took the life away from me, actually. So a lot of the pieces around this are favorable. I really appreciate the fact that you included the social and cultural aspects as a part of your weighting criteria, because that was fundamentally missing. At Clare Lake, they didn't even take into account how it was that people cared about that lake. Alternative 4, where you're talking about channelization around the lake and making it an offline lake, that would have mimicked the Clare Lake situation identically, and that was a disaster. Not only was it a disaster from the perspective that you were going to make a breeding ground for more geese and mosquitoes, the other challenge was that the creek was going to go right through someone's house. And so I like the fact that, alternative 4, I think I might have weighted it even lower from the perspective that I can't possibly imagine how you can hydraulically disconnect the creek from the lake, but that's fine. It didn't rise to the top. I guess my other question is, do you anticipate Part 2 requesters to the EA?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, no.
So, that's a big piece too. I think Council knew going into the approval on the EA for Clare Lake that there was already Part 2 requesters lined up to put together their application. So that's helpful. So given all of this information, notwithstanding the fact that I'm not the up-down councillor, I'm happy to be a part of moving or seconding or doing something with this motion.
Further questions? Councillor Henry.
This may end up being more of a detailed design question, and I want to focus on the creek rather than the lake in terms of those. I know I've heard talk before of that. I think if you cycle back to the overall picture, which has this one, yeah. So the dam and Gabion wall removal point at the what's really the access from the UW parking lot across some of those. I know I've heard chatter before around that access disappearing. Can you tell me more about where that access is in the minds of the project team at this stage of the project?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So we've done site walks through here and did come across that and spoke about it out on site, but also through public consultation. And if that dam and Gabion wall structure comes out, specifically the crossing over the dam, it would be replaced with a pedestrian bridge.
I think that's helpful to know, because it's a well-traveled route into that section of the park.
And the Gabion wall there is in very poor shape, so it does need to be removed and something happened to it. But again, if the dam comes out for the crossing, it'll be a pedestrian bridge.
Yeah, I'm certainly no environmental or engineering expert in this area by any stretch of the imagination, and that's quite evident from looking at it that it needs some work. So I appreciate that. So I'll just say then, in terms of other comments, I appreciate thus far from as near as you've been able to tell at this stage of the project that the solution being identified is within budget.
Yes.
That is good.
And then a question on the forebay. Certainly if the forebay moves to the west side of the LRT, we'll have new water space there. And if it does, the existing walkable part of the lake where the forebay is now on the right side, is that intended that would be extra lakes space, or would it be potentially naturalized, or that'll be in detailed design? We don't know yet.
That would be a part of the detailed design. It's hard to say right now what it would look like and what ultimate location. Really, the forebay piece of this has to be discussed at length with GRCA. They do know that that's the direction we're going in. Obviously, they've been a part of the whole EA process. I don't anticipate that we're going to have a huge issue getting approvals to do it. It's just where it's located and what it looks like is going to be subject to their approval.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, I heard that was moved by Councillor Durrell, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you both very much. Oh, next up, Municipal Election Compliance Audit Committee Terms of Reference Amendment, prepared by Julie Scott. Anybody have any questions on that? I was just going to say, it looks like one of yours, Councillor Henry. Councillor Henry, second by Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you.
I would just like to note, I desperately hope it doesn't look like one of mine.
Oh, it looked like something you'd be keenly interested in. Next up, Uptown Vision Committee comments, Uptown Zoning Bylaw, prepared by Ryan Mounsey and Rami Saeed. And I see Rami's here. Oh, there's Ryan. Okay. Welcome, Rami.
Thank you. All right. So the Uptown Vision Committee, based on its Vision 2025 and committee discussion, believe that the proposed changes introduced in the second draft of the Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw related to density and height reductions, as well as to the proposed parking, built form, land use provisions, and enabling design guidelines are significant and warrant further discussion to review in context. In terms of affordable housing, streetscape vibrancy, given the potential impacts on future developments, the built form and design, as well as active transportation and transit, supported development, and projects that have been supported by council prior to this bylaw. Uptown Vision Committee is basically just asking for more time to kind of discuss this and give a little bit more detailed commentary, given that the new bylaws are going to be very different than what was proposed in draft 2 as well.
Thank you, Rami. Councillor Freeman.
I guess my question's to Mr. Rapp, actually.
Okay. Anybody have questions of Rami at this time? Seeing none, go ahead, Councillor Freeman.
So, Mr. Rapp, can you help me to better understand, like, if we I guess we're being asked to approve this recommendation.
Well, actually, we've changed the recommendation to simplify it. The council receives this as information, and that the Uptown Vision Committee comments before to staff for consideration. So we've simplified it.
Yeah, because my question is like, when does the clock start ticking? So, and how much time that the committee is looking for after the final draft is brought to us. So I guess it would be helpful down the road to get an idea on that.
Just as an added comment to you, Councillor Freeman, through the chair, Mayor Jaworski, is that since the resolution originally came forward in March 9th, staff and the administration have also deferred and delayed the formal public hearing, giving a further several weeks for input for the community in general as well. And we'll take these comments into consideration in the final report. Thank you.
Councillor Whaley.
Just for your information, Rami, the Economic Development Committee met last Tuesday, and the same issue was before us. Members of the committee were really looking for extra time. They thought that even the delay of a couple weeks that has been built in was not enough for complete consultation and complete review. So I just wanted to let you know that other committees are feeling the same constraints on how fast we're trying to push this through.
Thank you. Further comments? Seeing none, there's a motion to be made of receiving it for information. Councillor Durrell, Councillor Reith, all those in favor? Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan, for coming out. Award of tender RFT 1806, Albert Street and Princess Street West improvements. Prepared by Darren Scott. Councillor Durrell has a question. Okay, anybody have any questions on the tender? Seeing none, moved by Councillor Durrell, second by Councillor Whaley. All those in favor? Thank you, guys. Next up, City of Waterloo Green Building Policy Framework, prepared by Kevin Van Oudegem, and you're presenting, Kevin, or maybe Cinda's presenting. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We Jaworski and members of council. We are here to present this green building policy framework. Today, what we want to have is through this submission, we just want to make sure that the path that we are taking in setting up the framework is in the right path. So we like to get an endorsement on that. But we are taking this policy framework in two prongs. So there will be a second report coming in August, and where you will see the policy and some more prescriptive targets for the green building policy parameters. Again, there is one other point we would like you to consider is we have set the framework into 5 different buckets or 5 different streams, and out of that one we will be only taking one piece, that's green building, is the only one that we are going to take forward through this policy, and the other 4 will be left for future and by other that are more applicable at a community level and much broader level. So that will not be taken into the process at our next report. And other than that, I think I like to ask Kevin to go more into the technical matters, and at the end we will be having we'll be available for more questions to answer. Kevin.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Sunda, for that introduction. So today we are bringing 3 recommendations forward for Council's consideration as it relates to the new City of Waterloo Green Building Policy Framework. So specifically, that Council approved the report in front of you today, Report 18-027. Second, that Council endorsed the framework that Sunda talked about in recognition of the importance of reducing the environmental impact of city-owned buildings specifically. And third, that Council directs staff to submit a subsequent report in August, at which time we'll bring the final policy, as well as recommendations looking both at new construction, but also the retrofit of existing facilities, which I think is really important. So in terms of our current policy, I'm sure a lot of you are aware, about a decade ago, Council endorsed the policy you see here in front of you that concisely says all newly constructed municipal buildings greater than 500 square meters must be designed and certified by the Canadian Green Building Council to LEED Silver at minimum. So that's sort of where we're at today in terms of our current policy. So why am I here today? What is the motivation for changing our policy? And I think when I thought about that, really there's 3 key drivers here, I think, that are at play. The first is the notice of motion that we received back in March from Council, which really directed staff to take a leadership role in demonstrating how the community can achieve the GHG reduction targets of the Waterloo Region Climate Action Plan, among other things in that motion, but that was really the key takeaway for me. I think the second key driver here is some of the initiatives that the city has recently been involved in, and the 2 that I'll highlight here are the Community Energy Investment Strategy for Waterloo Region, which was presented in February of this year, as well as the Climate Action Waterloo Region initiative in April of this year. So coming out of all of that, Council really adopted a community scope greenhouse gas emissions reduction target of 80% below 2010 by 2050. So that's a key number here. And then third, the motivation for change here is really the construction of some of these new buildings that are coming online in the next few years, like the East Side Library and the WMRC expansion. In some ways, we're straddling between the old policy and the potential new policy here on these projects, but I think at the very least, having a clear understanding of where the city is headed in terms of green building policy will be beneficial to all projects going forward. So I thought I would show this graph because I think it does a really good job of capturing where we are today and where we may have to go in the future and how progressive our policy may have to be. So what you see here is sort of a look at that 2050 timeframe in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions specifically, so looking at through the GHG lens. What you see here on the left side of the graph with the dark blue bars are actual greenhouse gas emissions from the aggregate of all of our city facilities. So this is a known number because we report every year to the Ministry of Energy through the Green Energy Act. So this is something that we report on every year. And I think what's significant to me when I look at this is really the downward trend that we see. And the reason, the primary two drivers for that, there are a couple of them, but one is I think the significant investment that Council has made in recent years in terms of investing in energy reducing initiatives. And one in particular I'd like to highlight is another report that's coming this afternoon, but it was the $4 million investment in the retrofit of existing facilities here at the City of Waterloo. And because of that, we're now receiving about $500,000 a year in savings, which is terrific. And I think that's a great initiative and a really good story coming out of this. And that's certainly contributed to the trend that we've seen here over the last few years. The second wave that we've been riding here as well is sort of the decarbonization of the electricity grid in Ontario. So with the coal-fired plants coming offline in 2014, I believe it was, we've definitely benefited from that initiative as well. So that's sort of the current state. And then what you see with the light blue bars going forward out to 2050 is a projection that was done for all of our city facilities, taking into account the new ones coming online as well as things that are in our capital budget. And you can kind of see how we would trend over the next 30 plus years. And obviously there's lots of assumptions in there, but I think this is sort of the key takeaway here is the general trend that you see. Then what we did is we plotted that against the red line, which are some of the key targets that are noteworthy. So the 6% reduction by 2021, and then the 80% reduction by 2050. So why is this important? Well, I think the key takeaway from all of this is that you'll see in the short term, in the next, let's say 10 years or so, we're in a pretty good position to meet our objectives. The challenge for us will be in the long term. So as you can see, at some point around 2030, it's likely that our status quo or our business as usual won't necessarily keep up with the target. So I think, again, this is just context, and obviously there's lots of assumptions built in here over the next 30 years, but this is, I think, just good context to have as we have this discussion around a green building policy. So in terms of the specifics, what we're proposing, like Sunda talked about the framework here, it's really the idea of moving away from the LEED certification process. And I want to stress that we're not necessarily doing away with LEED or the Canadian Green Building Council. That's not what we're talking about. We're specifically talking about the certification process, which, as we know, can be quite expensive. Our consultant, as an example, for the WMRC estimated that as about $100,000, just as a reminder on that project for the certification work. We're looking to adopt a more prescriptive methodology to align with the city's stated targets in terms of greenhouse gas and energy reduction targets. So really taking on a bit of an ownership piece there and setting targets that we want to achieve. One of the ideas here is that we're recommending that we align our green building policy in principle with the one that the City of Toronto has developed. We did a jurisdictional scan of a number of municipalities, and this is one that kind of was pretty obvious that it was on sort of the leading edge of some of this with the other municipalities, so it seemed to be potentially a good fit. And another key factor here is that we focus not only on new buildings but also existing buildings. I think that's really key. So without getting into too much of the specifics, this is a very high-level overview of the City of Toronto. And what you can see is they've identified sort of 5 key buckets that they like to address: air quality, energy efficiency, GHG, and resilience, which I think is an interesting item there. Water balance, quality and efficiency, ecology, and solid waste. So like Sunda said, our intention going forward here with this specific policy is to really focus in on item 2, the energy and the GHG piece. That seems to be where you get a lot of return on investment, and which can generate further investment in green infrastructure. So I think it makes a lot of sense to focus in on that, understanding funding restrictions on our projects. But I think what's nice about this project is it really sets up a great framework, both looking internally at the City of Waterloo and other sustainable initiatives we might do, but also potentially in an outward-facing policy for the community building. I could see this being a very adaptable framework that could be adopted across multiple different departments or platforms. And then in terms of next steps, so what we're proposing is to explore the merits of the City of Toronto policy in more detail over the coming months. We'll then draft the City of Waterloo policy, and we'll review that policy with the Waterloo Sustainable Advisory Committee. And just on that note, we have been working with the Sustainable Advisory Committee up to this point on this framework, and they've commented on today's report and today's recommendations, so we're in close contact with them. We would then return to Council in August, present the final policy. And then lastly, and I think very importantly, is to develop a funding strategy to achieve the revised green building policy for Council's consideration as part of the 2020-22 budget process, which was one of the recommendations in the notice that we received. So that's pretty much it. And at this point, Sund and I would be happy to address any comments or questions that you may have.
Thank you, Kevin and Sunda. Questions from council? Commentary. Councillor Whaley, Councillor Henry.
Thank you for your presentation and your good work. Thank you especially for working with the Sustainability Committee, a very interesting group of environmental engineers and activists who are passionate about green buildings. You've listened to them, and that's a wonderful thing. They appreciate being involved. I think they have a lot to offer. I think you realized that when you saw the kind of report that you got back. So I'm glad to see that. You know, the coal fire plants got shut off in 2014, and we haven't had a smog day since. And that's a wonderful thing. But I think we as a city take too much credit for that. We didn't have anything to do with that. It was a provincial decision, and we've all benefited from it, but it shouldn't be a part of our thinking in terms of being successful in what we do. And I worry when I take a look at your and you've talked about this, but on page 93 of the report, you talk about the reduction targets and how we've had this success for much of it, in 2021, much of it because of the coal fire plant. But the fact of the matter is, by 2050, we fall woefully short on our promise to the citizens for an 80% reduction. We just don't get there. And so what I'm looking for is something that's more beefed up. Spending the money now. We know what we've done. You know, we've done the last couple of years. We spent on environmental upgrades to our buildings, and we saw ROI. We saw real quick return. And I'm looking for in your subsequent report in August some really beefed up stuff. Maybe have to go beyond what the Toronto plan is. We're not, because we're clearly not going to get there. In fact, we're not even going to get halfway there. And we got to do better. And you're in position now. We got to focus on this. How are we going to do better than 50% of the way there? Because if we only get there, we're just not getting the job done. And we have the opportunity to put those building blocks in place with good policy today to make that goal in 2050 achievable. And if we put together a policy knowing that we're not going to get there, what are we wasting our time for? Let's roll up our sleeves between now and August. The Sustainability Advisory Committee is there too, and go be real leaders. Don't copy what we're doing in Toronto, but something that's really that they'll want to copy us on.
Thank you, Councillor Whaley. Councillor Henry.
Before I make a comment, Kevin, the page in the report that Councillor Whaley refers to is slide 5 in your slide deck. Can you head back in that direction? So just to confirm, this is what we've already done and what we're already doing without taking into account the change that will be coming in policy in August and then the necessary implementation that will come through and be funded by next council, right? This is just where we've gone to date and is not an indication of where this policy direction you're suggesting will take us in the future.
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski. That is correct. This is basically a picture of where we are and where we are trending now based on business as usual. It is not necessarily the recommendation from staff going forward on where we should end up in 2050.
And I think that'll be, as you suggest, in August will be, I think the real conversation around the targets that we're setting and the kinds of things we'd have to do that then will fold into how we can fund it. So I think that's helpful context. And I think would it be fair to say that part of the challenge with the electricity grid has largely been decarbonized. There's not much more that one can do in terms of electricity usage efficiency to be able to gain greenhouse gas reductions. It's much more difficult to get the value there. The real value in this comes from anything we're using natural gas for, because that's obviously an entirely carbonized source of energy. So to get a good chunk of the way there, we're talking about sort of things that we use natural gas for predominantly in buildings. Am I getting that right?
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski, that is correct. Primarily, in order to achieve this, it is primarily about reducing the burning of fossil fuels. And a lot of times, when you start burning less natural gas, you start using more electricity. So even though your greenhouse gas emissions come down, your net utility bills can in fact go up just due to the price disparity between a unit of electricity and a unit of natural gas. So some of the things that we can do and that we are doing are pursuing some of the grant opportunities that are out there, and that's another report that's in front of you this afternoon. As an example, we're considering the submission of a $2 million grant for the WMRC to switch it over to a geothermal system. So rather than burning natural gas in a boiler plant, we can make use of the free energy, so to speak, in the ground. That would have a significant impact on that building. It would cut the greenhouse gas emissions by about 50%, but you wouldn't necessarily see a return on your energy bills. So at some point when we're developing this policy, there's going to be an honest discussion around the finances versus the returns here, I think.
Well, and that's where I wanted you to go, right? Because I was looking ahead a couple of reports, recognizing I think this is your presentation in time at the podium, and the rest are, are quick just reports and information items. That we can do a lot by being more efficient on how we build. We can do a lot by requiring less heating, whether it's by natural gas or other means, in terms of higher R values around the outside, on thinking about our windows, on how we site buildings and design them, on how we retrofit some old 1960s and 70s things into the modern era. We can go a long way. But to really get all the way to 80%, it's that absolutely zero financial return on investment kinds of investments that we've got 2 reports from now, but get us a large way there on GHGs. So in terms of comments, as you're looking for some validation of the direction you're going, I hear where Councillor Whaley's coming from. I think we need to be very thoughtful and think about those. I also think that it's going to be very difficult for us to get 100% of the way to this target without some senior government support for those kinds of zero ROI initiatives. Which is coming in 2 reports from now. Those are the kinds of things we'll need, I think, to get all the way to 80%. But I'd be interested in the kinds of things that that we can do to get much closer to that, and at an early time be able to make those asks to senior levels of government to say, we're putting in our penny, where's your penny? And show that kind of progress. So I appreciate the work today. I appreciate that you've kept me in the loop as well through this process. I think this is the kind of leadership that we need to demonstrate. We're already demonstrating it by being so far under the curve to date. We need to make sure we're still ahead of the curve in 2030. And the only way we're going to be ahead of the curve in 2030 is if we start trying to be ahead now.
Jacinda.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Henry is putting the facts in the correct sense. Just wanted to have a little cautionary note on this one, so that we understand the overall achievement that we would get through this one. 2 things. One is the greenhouse gas reduction, and then the other one is like the total cost, the financial piece, energy savings, and as a result, the financial cost reduction. They are somewhat going in complementary or somewhat independent in here, that even though we convert even if we reduce the greenhouse gas reduction, the running cost may not be going down. Secondly, the electricity reduction can be achieved through solar panel or battery backup, battery banks, but those things we have to explore that one as part of this one. But today this report is talking about greenhouse gas reduction. And one last point is the 80% reduction target is somewhat we are going to do all our work to see whether that can be achieved. But the point of caution is most of the buildings are existing buildings and that were built in 90s and before. So converting or reducing the cost or the greenhouse gas reduction may not be 100% achievable unless we build new buildings. So those are the things that we would like you to bring it to your attention, but our effort is going to see how far that we can go and reduce to 80%. So that's all. Thank you.
I think that's helpful context. I mean, most of the buildings everywhere that we're going to have in 2050 are here today. And so part of the reason for direction around retrofit was because most of the bang for a buck has to come on retrofit. And when we had the conversation about the relatively small expansion of the rec center, the best bang for the buck comes from the existing building. You put $1 million into the existing building, you get far more than an extra $1 million into the new building in terms of design. And I think that's the kind of thinking that we need. The one thing I'd suggest is you start working through targets and starting to think $4 million of investments in energy reductions. It's in this report. Part of the policy was that 25% of the savings that we got went into, rolled forward to fund future energy savings, and that's now in the infrastructure reinvestment fund. Is 25% for future energy reductions and 75% for budget the right balance? Or do we need to retain a higher portion of the savings that we generate to be able to build a revolving fund that grows and allow us to fund these savings without directly going back to the property tax base or the rate base each time? Is this a component of our broader infrastructure renewal strategy if we up that ratio? And I think it is. I don't know what the right number is. I know there'll be robust discussions between various departments because it is a significant budgetary matter and why 2020 is the right time frame to get that in line. But if we don't move that needle, we're not going to have the envelope growing in the way that we need to be able to fund some of the more expensive initiatives with less ROI.
So I have a question for Kevin or Sunda just on Councillor Henry's point and the graph at hand here. The next report talks about all our LED lighting savings and substantial savings that we're getting. However, we don't see a big drop in the graph. As a matter of fact, it doesn't go the right way. Is it because the LED lighting hasn't been implemented, or it's because hydro is so clean nowadays it doesn't affect greenhouse gases? It affects our savings of consuming less electricity, but the electricity itself has been captured in the gap between 2010 and 2016.
Yeah, to you, Mayor Jaworski. So what we see on the graph here is basically that $4 million energy project was substantially complete sort of end of 2016, kind of early 2017. So you do see a bit of a drop between 15 and 16 on the graph here, which I think is most likely attributed to that project. Why it goes up again, though, is because every time this is an absolute reduction. So if we add more square footage, as an example, the Waterloo Service Center expansion would have come online right in around this time as well. And then you see another kind of little blip in 2021 with the WMRC and the Eastside Branch Library. So these kind of blips that you see over the sort of forecasted years, taking into account that our gross square footage has increased. That would be one of the bigger factors at play there, to your question.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further questions, there's a motion on the table that was brought to us by Councillor Henry originally. Councillor Henry moves it, Councillor Whaley seconds it. All those in favour? That's all of us, thank you. Thank you. But wait, there's more. Update on annual utility savings from major energy retrofit work. Welcome again, Kevin. And this is just for questions, isn't it?
That's right. Okay. Yeah, no
questions. Councillor Whaley.
My question is to Ms. Patel. We have the actual return on investment here at 13.2%. Is there any other investments that we have at the city that gives us a 13.2% return on investment?
And we'll look at Ms. Patel here, represented by
I will
Paul.
Step in.
Oh, sorry,
there.
my back's to you, Paul. My apologies.
No worries. You are correct in your assumption that we do not make 13% on any of our investments. I believe the rate we brought that to council last month was 3 point something. About 3%
So the rate of return is 10% higher than that. Why wouldn't we be putting more money and more effort and more expense into greenhouse gas reduction when we get such an unbelievable return on investment?
Now,
it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah, okay. We'll take it as that. Further questions for Kevin? Seeing none, we have to receive this information. Councillor Veith would like to. Councillor Freeman would like to. All those in favour? That's all of us. Thank you. And we now have the Municipal Greenhouse Gas Challenge Fund, round 2 applications, as the program exists today anyway, prepared by Brad and Kevin. Councillor Henry. Oh, okay, Councillor Henry, Councillor Freeman, moved by. Please go ahead.
Question first, Brad. I think that the language was somewhat ambiguous in my reading. It suggested that the $10,000 to $15,000 expense was a future expense. My sense is to get here that's already been spent, correct?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Henry. A portion of it has been incurred to develop the options, with the remainder would be spent to complete the formal application. As you can imagine, it's a very technical type of a grant. Should the grant be successful, we would look to recoup those costs. If not, they would be an expenditure that we would have made, but we would have the options and all the calculations available for future grant opportunities if they aligned.
I was hoping the answer was it had already completely been spent, because I look at this and say this is I'm happy to continue to submit this application into the black hole that Premier Designate Ford has created for anything good in the world with respect to environmental issues, which this certainly would be, and it's just disappointing that this kind of fund to allow so much public benefit is likely gone, especially after so many municipalities and other organizations across this province are in our position, who in good faith have engaged with the program and continue to today to create excellent public benefit. So I'm disappointed in what I know the result will be from this, but it is important that we do finish the work that we started and identify how important these projects are.
Further questions or commentary? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you. Thanks for all your work on all these, Kevin. Brad too. And Cinda as well. And that's it for the reports. However, we do have some late starters. And unless anybody wants them separated, I can take them all together. Or do you want them separate? Okay, we have 4 late starters here today. One on parkland funding to transfer $2 million from Parkland Reserve to capital project. We have a Waterloo City Centre lease agreement, renewal of that. We have a former Crouse Lands funding release of $200,000 for Phase 1 ESA on the Crouse Lands out on the east side. And then finally, the one here, a delegation bylaw amendment. The council approve a delegate approval and execution of all city leases of the City of Waterloo Chief Administrative Officer, subject to approval of the Chief Financial Officer, in a form and agreement to the satisfaction of the city's solicitor. Do I have a mover for those 4? Seeing Councillor Durrell, Councillor Freeman. Please go ahead.
I just had a question about the district plan piece.
Go ahead. That's on the Crouse Lands, right? Please go ahead.
For Mr. Rapp, does it need to be here?
In terms of district plan for Crouse Lands, is that something that should be added here in the report that we have here?
If it's council's desire that staff proceed with a more detailed district plan for that area, then it would be nice to receive that direction.
Yeah, then I want that on this as an amendment, or like as an additional recommendation that staff initiate a district planning process, whatever is the right language.
Yeah. Good. Seeing no further comments or questions, all those in favor? All of us. Now, I have some new business. I'm pleased to share that one of our own has achieved significant career milestone. Councillor Diane Freeman is one of only 59 people from across the country to be inducted this year into the Canadian Academy of Engineering as a new fellow. The induction ceremony took place last week, and this distinction recognizes engineers of outstanding abilities and of varying backgrounds from industry, academia, and government. This is also a recognition of Diane's demonstrated desire and ability to go beyond the normal practice of engineering and contribute in an exemplary way towards the engineering field of our community. Congratulations, Diane. I wanted to make sure we had the opportunity this afternoon because it could be a late night, and I figured we could at least enjoy ourselves now. Thank you. About that? Sure, go ahead. We're still under new business.
I will
so
say thank you very much. It's just I had an item under new business, and I just wondered if it was easiest to take care of it now. So over the course of the past 4 years, I've spent an inordinate amount of time sitting down with constituents, and I'm sure all of you have, with regard to traffic in urban neighborhoods and traffic speeds primarily. And staff have been great. They've always undertaken traffic studies and so on, which typically identifies that traffic speeds are somewhere between 50 and 60 kilometers an hour. The City of Toronto has recently passed a bylaw to make their urban areas, I believe, 40 kilometers an hour. And I was wondering whether Council would support providing direction to staff so that we can better understand as a council what that would look like if we wanted to make that change in our urban areas, and start considering what that looks like. Because I mean, we can't afford to do a traffic study and traffic calming initiatives in every neighborhood across the city. And certainly Waterloo Regional Police doesn't have the financial resources to do selective traffic enforcement every place that someone feels that traffic's moving too quickly. And we know that speed kills. I mean, that's in the update from Waterloo Regional Police in terms of the annual report and their strategic update that was just released. So I would value, I'm happy to move that motion to give direction to staff to provide council with information on lowering the speed limits in urban areas to 40 kilometers an hour. And so we understand what the process is and what that might look like.
So I'm going to look to Mr. Rapp perhaps for information, because a few ideas come to mind is at Region of Waterloo, for example, they're studying the Vision Zero work. There's potential opportunities for the cities and the region to work together just on studying that and getting further information, because I think something like this would actually come, well, it's going to be certainly a next term of council where this type of information comes, but where we might be able to go in terms of gathering information at this point in time.
Certainly through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman. I believe the best approach would be I'll speak with my directors of engineering and transportation to see about the appropriate way to introduce it into the transportation master plan, which we're going to be beginning, because it could affect the models based on the speed. So I think that's probably the best approach, but I'll speak with both of those directors and I can do a briefing note on how we believe that the best approach is for that.
So that might be something that we could do. Are you thinking about a briefing note, Mr. Rapp? Is that what you're thinking of?
No, this would be our own City of Waterloo Transportation Master Plan, which we're just in the process of finalizing the RFP to go out.
Okay, back to Councillor Freeman.
Yeah, I think that could be a really great landing spot to have this conversation. And then the other question I had is those new centerline signs that we've purchased for near the T-ball diamonds. People like them. And so I guess the question is, can we purchase more? And can we put a few in areas where people have asked? So there are a few locations where there's a lot of cut-through traffic. For example, I can think of 2 in my ward, and I'm sure that all of you can think of a couple. And I just wondered whether as a city we can secure a couple more of those signs so that we can at least try them out in some of these locations and see if they're effective.
Yeah, and maybe talk a bit about the plan that we had in terms of putting those out there and what the feedback we're going to get. Mr. Rapp.
Certainly, again, through your Mayor Jaworski to Councillor Freeman. The transportation group will be assessing the effectiveness of the signs, but it is good to hear that you're hearing positive results from the general public. They are relatively inexpensive, and at a department level we have talked about perhaps purchasing more of them, and we've not yet determined the best use of them, but I think we're open-minded to hear of suggestions. But just so you know, we are looking at promoting that use, if you will, that type of structure for traffic calming, or reminders, if you will, for individuals.
Great, that sounds good, because I think those, they actually come out in October sometime anyways, right? So by the time we ordered some, got them, we'd be putting them in and taking them out.
That's right. We do want to have them removed in time for our favorite time of the year, which is leaf collection.
For leaf pickup,
that's
absolutely.
Correct. Yeah.
Councillor Whaley.
I have some anecdotal information. Last week I met with some grade 3 students at Lincoln Heights School. They brought 21 letters forward with respect to trying to protect their crossing guard on Lincoln Road. 95 suggestions came forward. Not one of them was reduced speed, which I thought was really interesting. Speed limit is just a number. It's an arbitrary number to a certain extent. And what I'd like to hear from this is, by reducing it by 10 kilometers an hour, is that going to result in anybody slowing down? So I'm interested in getting some hard data on, does all this mean is that people get bigger tickets? And, you know, I don't know how they're doing it in Toronto, but when I'm in Toronto, it's just such a horror show driving around there. And I'm driving over the speed limit, and I'm the slowest guy in the lane. They're honking and push me side of the road. I'd require, you know, some hard data to make such a big leap in terms of costs, putting up new signs, probably having to reduce the school zones down to 30. It's such a big change, and I don't know if it's going to result in any real change in driving patterns. I always thought the solution would be more, in the places we know people are speeding, is better enforcement, but we don't seem to get the cooperation from the regional police on that. They're busy, I know that. But, you know, our biggest issue that we hear in the neighborhoods is speeding in the neighborhoods, and that doesn't seem to be coming up on the radar of, no pardon the pun, coming up on the radar of our local police. When we ask for enforcement, we might get a slow response, and they might show up for one day, and that doesn't seem to be making a difference. So for me, lots of data will. In fact, at Lincoln High School, we did put one of those speeding signs up this week, and we're going to be collecting data for the next 2 weeks. The information will be studied over the summer, and maybe some information will come out of that to as we report back to the students in the fall about some of the plans. The number one thing of the 95 votes, the number one suggestion from the students on the crosswalk, paint the crosswalks brighter. Simple fix, a little bit of paint. And I can report that last week that crosswalk was painted brighter. And interesting in how these young students, 7 and 8 year old, have come forward with some really inexpensive but sensible solutions that we'll be taking a look at.
Good information, Councillor Whaley, and I think if the current government continues on its plan of allowing municipalities to use photo radar in sensitive areas, that would be another tool for our kit as well. I just figure that some people going back and forth through a school zone in one day might get like 10 tickets, so I'm not sure how that might work, but we'll see.
And anecdotally, I believe that's all people speeding in their own neighborhoods.
Oh, yeah.
So at this point, do we have to recess? Do I need a motion to recess? We just declared recess. We're recessed, speaking of school.